we are going to start with session 1. After the keynote, this session is career transitioning, cyber or not. Taking the steps is half the battle. I'd like to welcome up on stage our moderator, Nazia Sharif, and our panelists, the FBI's Tanya Ugaretz, Google's Jeanette Manfrey, Amber Simcoe with NIH, and Alicia Lynch with Cognizant. Ladies?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you to everyone at the Cyber Guild for having us here today. As Elizabeth mentioned, my name is Nazia Sharif. I'm the COO at Next5. Next5 is a business intelligence and strategic advisory firm focused on emerging technologies and geopolitics. I started my career in the public sector and have spent majority of it in the private at this point. It's truly an honor to be amongst this, honestly, the leaders in this industry. And I'm really excited to be here to be moderating this event. So I look forward to hearing the insights that Tanya, Jeanette, Amber, and Alicia have to share with us. So we'll go through, we'll do some self-introductions, and then at that point, we'll move into some questions. And please feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions for any of our panelists here, and we'll be monitoring that as well. So Tanya, I'm gonna go ahead and start off with you.
Hi, thank you, and hello everyone. Thank you to everyone who's attending and who's been involved in organizing this event. And I too am thrilled to be with these colleagues on this panel. So my name is Tanya Ugaretz. I work for the FBI in our cyber division, which is responsible for investigating computer intrusions that are conducted both by cyber criminals as well as by nation state actors. So I'm coming up on about 20 years with the FBI, the last 6 of which have been in cyber. And so some of what I've experienced is that transition from joining the government in 2001, when all of our efforts really were focused on counterterrorism, making that shift maybe about 2/3 of the way or so through my career to today's emerging threat issues, cyber.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Jeanette, do you want to go next?
Sure, happy to. So happy to be here. Thanks to the team for setting this up. My name is Jeanette Manfrey. I'm the Director for Risk and Compliance for Google Cloud. Prior to joining Google about 1.5 years ago, I was in the government for about 20 years. Spent the first part of my career in the Army, as both in the Signal Corps and in the intelligence service. And then when I left, ended up finding my way into cyber by supporting the Department of Homeland Security's Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, or what is now referred to as CISA. So I spent about 13, 14 years in and around different aspects of building that organization before I joined Google.
Great, thank you so much. Amber? Amber, I think you're on mute.
Somebody had to do that. I apologize. I'm Amber Simcoe. I'm the Deputy Chief Information Officer here at NIH. I've been at NIH for a bit over 10 years, 10, 12 years. And I hope that my experience on this panel really speaks to the large portion of the audience that you said is actually not yet in cyber. So the majority of my background actually came from auditing, risk management, and knowledge of our financial systems. That's part of how I made my way over. I happen to have a background in public policy from University of Maryland and in national security, where I attended the Naval War College. So I have quite a background that didn't directly lead me to cyber, but I found my way here at NIH and in the federal government.
Thank you so much for sharing. So honestly, just hearing all the diverse backgrounds and just seeing how you guys all have transitioned into the into the cyber sector, I kind of wanted to hear a little bit more about your experience and kind of talking a little bit about something that we had mentioned earlier in one of our prep calls was imposter syndrome. And to be completely candid, I was kind of even freaking out when they asked me to moderate this event. I was like, wait, you got the wrong person. There's no way. So I was actually surprised when I heard Tanya mention and relate to that, because to me, she's a true industry leader. So when she said it, I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm not alone. So Tanya, do you mind talking a little bit about imposter syndrome?
Sure. So I actually was inspired to look into this issue a little bit last year when I was invited to record a vignette for CISA Security Summit. And I chose to focus on imposter syndrome because I think it's something that limits the willingness of some people who don't come from a cyber or technical background to explore the opportunities that there are. So if you Google the CISA Summit from 2020 and my name, you'll find that video. So, what I found really matched up with my experience coming to the cyber community, which is that, my career is as an intelligence analyst in the FBI and in the intelligence community. And so I had the opportunity about 6 years ago to be part of the startup of a new multi-agency center in the intelligence community that was going to be focused on cyber. And so when I was asked to consider joining that center, I thought, well, I can use my background as an intelligence analyst to maybe help build the analytic processes and the product lines and all of those things that go into, writing and sharing and briefing analytic products in the government. But long story short, after I interviewed for that position, I was more surprised than anyone to be selected to be the director of the Cyber Center. And I had that exact same conversation that you just described, which was, thank you very much, the wrong person. Because my assumption would be, for many reasons, not least of which is credibility in leading an organization devoted to cyber, you might want someone with a cyber background. But the reality was that what they were looking for were other skills, the ones I already mentioned, but also collaboration skills, the ability to work with multiple agencies, the ability to address multiple people's concerns and equities and to build something, which I did have experience in. And so what I realized is that I didn't need to know everything in order to be a credible leader, but I also, I think early on, faced the question of how transparent should I be about my own weaknesses. And I very quickly came to the decision that I wasn't going to fool anybody by pretending that I knew things that I didn't. And I was just very transparent that here's why I think I'm here, here's where I'm going to be relying on the rest of you. And I needed the folks around me to know that I needed them to share their expertise with me so that as their leader, I could represent them in the best way possible.
I really appreciate that. And like I said, that's something that totally resonated with me. So I appreciate you just being so candid about it and sharing your thoughts. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that really needed to hear that. Is there anything that Jeanette or Amber, you would like to add to that?
Sure. Well, I'll add that Tanya was awesome in her leadership role in that interagency group, and she's very right. Is there's plenty of folks around who have deep subject matter expertise. There's not always enough people around who understand how to bring that all together, drive towards a strategic outcome, and collaborate across sometimes challenging boundaries. And I would say agree with everything that she said. I think especially on the transparency part, a lot of times it can be very uncomfortable to feel like even in some conversations you're like, I really don't even understand what you all are talking about. And I found though that if you sort of have the courage to ask the question, you'll find really quickly, well, a couple of things. One is that you weren't the only person that was confused. And second, it's possible that they didn't know what they were talking about either. There was just a lot of like fancy words being kind of thrown around. And so to have that, humility and courage, it's hard. You don't want to do it all the time. But to be able to do that is really helpful. And I think it brings other people along too. It's a very complicated topic. Just, like really a lot of things, but particularly when you're sort of getting at policy and intelligence and operations and technology, all these things coming together, it's really complicated. And I think there's also increasing a recognition that more different skill sets are necessary to improve it. The only thing I would add is that it is important, though, to get that depth of expertise. Even if your main focus is a policy role or a procurement role, is to be able to understand with some depth the technical aspects of what is happening is really important. It'll help you make better decisions, regardless of what your role is, and it also helps sort of bolster your credibility, frankly, as a leader, because you're not going to be able to understand potentially some of the nuances. I've never met an engineer that didn't want to sit down with me for hours on end and walk me through everything that they know. And most of them love doing it. They love sharing that knowledge, and they'll do that very willingly. So I think it's not just, it's important to have that transparency, but it's also, you have to take it upon yourself, get the training, talk with people to really understand it, because I do think a lot of folks think that you can get by with sort of a surface level understanding, and that doesn't do you or the organization any good, when many of these topics are so nuanced that having that technical ability to differentiate what these different issues are is important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeanette, for that. And I was actually speaking with some colleagues the other day, and I did not know a ton about your background, but they said Jeanette is a leader of the people. So that's the word on the street. So thank you for sharing your thoughts there. Amber, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think both Tanya and Jeanette seem to have turned imposter syndrome into a strength, and I think you guys could both probably coach plenty of people into overcoming that, which I think is amazing. I think I think Jeanette, you also got into a lot of some of the other things we might cover in the panel later about how being able to admit that you don't have a certain type of background doesn't totally alleviate you from needing to know those technical details. So, and honestly, I think that's part of the fun, and what keeps my attention and focus is having to learn very quickly and to get up to speed on those technical details to the extent that I can. So I think while you might not end up becoming an expert after revealing that you feel like an imposter, you can, as both Tanya and Jeanette got at, you can build those relationships on that complementary expertise, and hopefully bring that to the strength of the group and to your organization. I do think there is some legitimacy to imposter syndrome, in that you walk into a room where people have years more experience and expertise than you. That's real, but there is something unique that you're bringing to the situation. And that oftentimes, even if I am the person with the least amount of experience early in my career, especially, I felt this, I might be the only person who saw or understood what was going on in a particular instance, and I might be the only person who can do the briefing on that topic with any level of accuracy. And sometimes that can be the antidote to imposter syndrome, is also knowing that your experience and knowledge is also legitimate, even if it's not backed up by years and years of experience.
That's really reassuring, especially for someone like me, like I said, being in this room with you guys. So thank you so much for sharing that as well. So as leaders, and especially because you had just mentioned this, Amber, as leaders in cyber, what kind of opportunities do you see, and what skills are needed?
Is that for everyone, Nazia, or you want me to start?
Yeah, why don't we start with you, but that's for everyone.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. I think the opportunities are as broad as our threats, and as broad as our need to develop the capabilities to defend and respond to those threats. So the opportunities are really as limitless as that, which is unfortunate, but gives a lot of range for us as being on the good guy side to recruit from. There's a lot of opportunities, and I think in general in the cyber industry, that explains why we have this huge gap, and have such a difficult time recruiting and finding people who are a good match. So I think the opportunities are very, very, very broad. As far as the skills, I think we can focus on the technical skills, which I think that all of us could pick up on, but I do think that there are some skills that will pay off from a wide range of backgrounds. And I think, Jeanette, you touched on this, and it's just, it's a genuine sense of curiosity. I think that has gotten me a long, long way. And that in itself is a skill. Knowledge of risk management practices and governance practices within your organization can go a long way as well. And the ability to digest very, very complex topics, and at least summarize and explain them to diverse stakeholders is incredibly valuable. I think there will always be skills needed to keep up with the cyber policy and requirements. I don't think I need to tell anyone that, but that requires constant maintenance and upkeep. And I would strongly emphasize that anybody who can try, just to make the effort to do that, and that will be highly valuable for anyone trying to transition over.
Absolutely, and that's great feedback. Tanya and Jeanette, is there anything you guys would like to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I think Amber made really great points. I think cyber is very much a cross-disciplinary field, and there's oftentimes we focus very much on the incident responder, the hunter, or there's these sort of very discrete roles which are very much in need. And so if you're interested in getting deep technically, absolutely, you should do that. There's so much training that's available, and oftentimes companies will even pay for it because it's just such a demand to have that. And a really useful guide is the National Initiative for Cyber Education. NIST, the Department of Commerce, has done a lot of really good work there. It was a lot of other agencies supporting that breaks down very nicely what the different sorts of roles there are. This is in sort of the general kind of category of what people would think about cybersecurity. So you have your managers, your compliance professionals, your defenders, those sorts of things. There's also other functions that are really important. You need lawyers. Lots of lawyers, it turns out, to work on these issues. And so some of the best lawyers that I had at DHS and we have at Google is like people who understand the technology and they understand the law and they understand how to take a risk-based approach, an advisory role in implementing sometimes vague requirements. It's a really sort of burgeoning field. There's even universities now who are starting to introduce like kind of cross technical engineering and legal degrees. Amber mentioned risk management. Even if you are a deeply technical cyber person, it's really important to understand risk management practices overall, because in the end, cyber is just another risk that many organizations have to manage. So if you are that very focused cyber individual, if you can characterize those in terms of risks and how that will manifest either negatively or positively to your organization, you will go really far. There's a lot of people that are very capable in getting deep in the technical weeds, but being able to go to an executive and say, if you don't invest X resources, this is the risk that you could be potentially accepting. And being able to make those links and using data to make those links is really useful. So there's a ton of other sort of fields that increasingly it's just about being very like digitally and cyber literate. That sort of differentiates you, even if you're not strictly in the field. Procurement officials is one I say all the time. These are folks that really need to understand how their procurement practices and where they may be introducing risks from third-party IT products and services is a good example. So there's a lot of areas where you don't have to jump really immediately from the role you're in into some completely different thing. But if you're interested in it, you can take what you're working on right now, build those like cyber and digital literacy, and then you'll start to see, I think, more doors open up and maybe a path that you hadn't even envisioned landing you in a different role 5 years down the road.
That's really helpful. And it's interesting that you actually touched on points that we were actually getting in the chat. So these are some questions that people were asking. So without you even knowing those are part of the questions, you just answered those. So thank you for that. So hopefully that helps everybody about transitioning and how to kind of get into the cyber industry without it being technically just cyber. Tanya, anything that you want to touch on?
No, I mean, Amber and Jeanette hit it really well. And I think those are great points about sometimes we think very narrowly about, well, I want to work in cyber, so I need to, figure out how to do cyber. Exactly. But I think Jeanette especially highlighted how, cyber is infused in nearly everything now. It's almost a cliche to say it, but that approaching it from, you know, the vantage point of something you're already doing or a skill set you already have is a great first step. I'll also just note that, you know, there's not many bright sides to the pandemic, but I think, you know, one potentially is just that it has opened the eyes to a wider swath of society that, you know, cybersecurity is important. It's not just a niche field, that it really needs to be part of all of our schools, our businesses, every layer of state, local, and municipal government. And so when you think about opportunities and needs, and you just think about, you know, the need for every school district and every, you know, state and local government and every size of company to be thinking about cybersecurity in some way that, you know, maybe a year and a half or so ago, they really weren't thinking about.
Absolutely. And one of the questions that we actually also got in the chat was about people that are trying to transition into the industry that have been in leadership roles, you know, in a different industry, but now trying to transition and don't have all the technical backing. So how does somebody make that transition and still be someone that comes in as a senior role? Is that possible?
I think you have to be realistic. If you're switching industries, you're going to, there's going to be a time when you will probably feel like you're taking a step back in terms of seniority. But that's okay, because you're doing that with an end goal in mind. You're going to spend that time learning. You know, you want to make sure, of course, you're landing in the right place that's going to give you that opportunity to grow, and that culture supports that. But I think the idea that you're sort of at this very senior level and then you're just going to transition immediately into a very senior level, you doing a completely different topic and industry is probably not viable. It depends, of course, on the opportunity. Sometimes you might have a group that's just looking for a senior person that's very good at the management and administration side of it. That's definitely something that I've seen people go. I've also seen policy folks who are deep on national security. They should switch over into cyber policy because they kind of have that deep national security expertise and they're bringing that. So there are cases where it can happen, but I think for the most part, you want to think that you might be taking a step back in seniority, but you're doing that for the purposes of learning. And then ideally, then you're leapfrogging because you've already got all of that management and sort of that experience that maybe other folks haven't gotten yet in the cyber industry.
Thank you for sharing that. So another question that actually kind of came in, and it's long, so I'm going to try to condense it a little bit, but it's about federal employees trying to figure out initiatives that are going on in other agencies without it seeming like they said insider threat-ish. So sometimes you want to know what other opportunities are out there and what projects there are, but at the same time, everything's on a need-to-know basis. So how do you know what opportunities are there without seeming like insider threat?
I think it's just about building your network naturally through whatever work you're engaged in your day-to-day. Finding those people who are working on things that are, you know, similar to your interests, and kind of building out from there, rather than maybe you know, cold calling someone and asking a question that seems kind of to what you do. Path from where you are to the place that, or the people that you're interested in, and ideally, you know, if it's not someone you have a direct relationship with, maybe, you know, find those degrees of separation between you and them that will enable someone to broker an introduction for you, for example.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think a key part of what Tanya said there is to build those networks naturally. That has definitely been true for me, is that there are so many opportunities that come up in the federal government, in my experience, because we're oftentimes so lean, and especially in the civilian agencies where cyber is not our primary mission. There is a lot of need for IBTs what are those, integrated project teams. There are task forces, working groups, oftentimes committees trying to solve individual problems. And if you have a colleague or someone you work with on a particular issue, and you can use that to kind of get a foot into working on a related issue that is cyber relevant, a cyber working group. And I don't think it's a bad idea to talk with your supervisor about your interest in that area, or to work at an agency level on some of these working groups. Even if you don't end up liking what you're doing, that type of experience is always going to be valuable, hopefully, to whatever part of the organization you're in. And then if you find yourself working, actually, there were several roles that I was in where it involved me coordinating within HHS, other operating divisions, and using those opportunities as well to build a bridge to some of those areas. I think to ask to transition at a senior level, just cold going in is a pretty big ask. I think there's a lot of smaller bridges that can potentially be crossed while you're in your current position, given the level of needs and the amount of committees and working groups that are in any organization.
I think one thing just to add for federal employees, or actually any level of government employees, there, I think this still is around something called the Federal Virtual Training Environment, FedVTE. My old agency and a couple others coming together. This is under that National Initiative for Cyber Education. It's a ton of free online cybersecurity classes, free for federal, state, and local employees. And because one of the key things that you can do to make up for your lack of experience is certifications. And so if you take some of that training and then you're able to get some of those certifications, that can often help you get over the hump through like a USA Jobs posting or something like that. So just know that that is at least it was available when last I was in the government. I think it still is.
Yeah, Jeanette, I think it is. The last time I checked, but there's also, I think CISA also has online trainings that are available. And I also know of CDSE, which I think is run by Department of Defense, classes that you can take virtually. And that are actual classes where you might meet people from other agencies as well. Great suggestion.
Yeah, great resources. Thank you so much for sharing that. So just kind of with all that in mind, just as we kind of close out, can you guys like talk a little bit about what's been the most rewarding part of all of this and your most rewarding experience? Anybody can take that. So Jeanette, you seem really excited about it. So I'm going to just say Jeanette. So what's, something in your career, what's been the most rewarding?
No, I was thinking of my answer.
Oh.
I think, a lot of it is not specific to cyber. I think, some of the most rewarding things have been the people that I work with and have worked with from a working. I think, generally in security, there's a camaraderie. In the old days, it was, nobody was paying attention to us. Now maybe everybody's paying attention, but there's definitely a camaraderie of, being in this discipline. It's very challenging. It's very exciting. Things change really quickly. Even in my role right now, I do mostly like risk and compliance. Even compliance is actually interesting in this space because it's changing and you're building new mechanisms. So I think if you thrive in ambiguity, if you have that sort of, I think Amber was talking about that curious approach and a learning mindset, and you're willing to sort of constantly be challenged, it can be really rewarding. It's also it's kind of the big national security thing, right, that we're all dealing with, and it really is. I think it's changing the way that government and private sector and everybody works together. So I think it's also just fascinating to be a part of really the vanguard of shaping, I think, what will be the way that we all work together over the next several decades.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. Amber?
Yeah, that some of the most rewarding experiences are when there is something very urgent. For me, is when something is very urgent going on, and I end up working with different group of people or having to bring in a whole other set of a whole other team. We have to make sure that we're using our tools to the greatest extent in order to solve problems as quickly as possible. Even when it can be rewarding that even when we aren't able to very quickly, figure it out, that I'm working with some of the smartest, I feel like some of the smartest people in order to get the job done and get things under control. And that is incredibly rewarding. And as Jeanette said, the camaraderie of even when you have to reach out to another agency and report something and describe what's going on and what you're seeing. While it feels very revealing and might be even uncomfortable. It is very rewarding because you're building those opportunities to understand the work that you're doing in a much broader context. I just find that really empowering.
Absolutely. I love that. And, that's the biggest thing that I love about our company too. It's like we talk about the team culture and just working together and the teamwork. I feel like that truly changes and that really changes how you feel about any place is truly like working together in the teamwork piece of it. So thanks for sharing that. Jeanette, anything you'd like to add?
I think it's Tanya's turn.
Yeah,
Sorry, Tanya.
It's okay.
Just to second everything that was said, especially because I think a lot of what we do, I think some of the bonds that we form are through shared suffering and, what it takes to respond to significant cyber incidents and, what it feels like when you're in the center of the storm. It's really, that feeling of relying on the people around you that helps get you through it. But for me, I think what's been most rewarding is, being part of the FBI. I think one of the great things about our mission is that, we can see the threats kind of as they're forming, but we also have the opportunity to act. And so in those instances where we've actually helped either prevent something from happening or helped either individuals or companies recover more quickly or even, mitigate the damage. I can think of an instance of a company hit by ransomware where, we were able to help them recover. And for a small company, it was the difference between their going completely out of business or, being able to kind of to get back to business as usual. And we got the most amazing kind of handwritten cards from the employees in the company just saying, thank you and how much it meant to them personally. And those are the moments that remind you that while sometimes this can feel very, esoteric or technical, that, there's real human beings behind this activity that we're all trying to defend against, and there's real human beings who are being affected. So just that opportunity to make a difference in that space is what's most rewarding.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And we're just about at time. So I want to truly thank you guys for being so candid and open and honest with all of your feedback today and just sharing that. I know that the transition can be hard. So just you guys providing resources and your insight, I'm sure that's been really helpful for a lot of people, and you were able to also answer a lot of the questions that were coming in for that. So thank you guys. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Elizabeth unless there's anything else that Tanya, Amber, and Jeanette would like to add.
No, thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you so much for having us.